All right, we can go ahead and get started. I see people still jumping on, but that looks like it's slowed down a little bit. Um, so we'll go ahead and get us rolling. Thank you everyone for joining us today to hear about the proposed changes to the Business Ready Community Rules. My name is Heather Tupper. I am the Regional Offices Director. I work with our regional team across the state, and happy to be here this morning just to kick us off. Just wanted to make sure a couple of housekeeping things real quick as we get rolling. As was mentioned in the chat, this is our main webinar for this introduction. We will be recording this webinar and have it posted online, as well as send it out through some of our partner organizations to make sure that people have access to it for the next couple of months. The public comment period for the proposed changes for the rules is now open. So today we will take some time and walk through what the proposed changes are. At the end, we will have time for questions that you all might have. But any comments that you would like to make on the proposed rules will need to be made in writing. We'll share that link once or twice throughout this presentation and make sure that it is available. But it's really important that we note that all of the comments to be considered in the changes must be in writing. So we'll share that link with you. Also, for the sake of today, if you can please utilize the Q&A function of the webinar, that will help us keep track of the questions and also for future use of those questions as we put together our FAQs and whatnot. So please utilize the Q&A function. We will keep an eye on that and work through those at the end. In May, we should have plenty of time for that. So with that, I think I can go ahead and turn it over to Bert and Noelle, who are our investments team folks who are going to lead the webinar today.
Well, I'll just do a quick introduction and then hand it over to Noelle. And thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Bert Adam. I am the investments director for the Wyoming Business Council. I've actually lived in Wyoming for almost 20 years. I did not grow up in Wyoming. I grew up near Sundance, just across the border in Spearfish, South Dakota. I am really passionate and love learning new things, love taking on new challenges and solving new and bigger problems. And it turns out Wyoming's economy has kept my attention for at least the last 5 years, and I'm excited every day to keep working on the things that we work on here at the Business Council. These new rules that we're going to talk about today are part of all of those things that I like. I like to learn and solve new challenges, and we think that these new rules will really help address some of those identified challenges that we've seen with BRC and with Wyoming's economy. And I think maybe important for me to note is just that the reason I do a lot of this is my two boys are important to me, and they make it a passion of mine to make sure Wyoming is an option for them when they can choose wherever they want to live, that we grow our economy and make Wyoming the best we can so that they have that as a choice. Noelle?
Thanks, Bert. Noelle Reed. I'm the Grants Portfolio Manager for the Business Council. Similar to Bert on the, why I'm here, I have a 6-year-old boy. And I want to make sure that there are opportunities available for him. And I know that there's a lot of changes going on in Wyoming and the United States right now. And I know like these BRC rules aren't going to fix everything. But when I was looking at, the problems with our economy and the things that I can control, this is one area that I can control. I manage the BRC program, and I feel that the changes that we're proposing can really help our state move to the next level, move the needle. It's not gonna fix everything, but kind of thinking at it as how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And this is kind of one bite that we're taking to try to reverse that economic decline that we're seeing in the state. So we're gonna move in right now into the rules, and I'm gonna actually turn it back over to Bert to start us off on the first slide.
And it'll be good to just kind of set a foundation for the problem that we're looking at, the learnings that we've done, and sort of the vision before we dive into rules. So, Wyoming's economy or economic development strategy is really more of a problem statement than a strategy. But our problem is the composition of economic activities in Wyoming aren't positioned to sustain a high quality of life across all parts of the states. And when I think economic activities, I really think jobs and wages. And I think about, do the jobs that we have match with the education of our college students? Are those jobs that the college students that graduate today from University of Wyoming or our community colleges want to take? And then I go into the tools that we have. So through leadership, policy, and investments, those are the tools that we have, or the levers that we can use to affect change, to drive different economic outputs. The Wyoming Business Council builds resilient statewide systems and teams that solve the most important barriers to economic growth. And so using leadership, investments, and policy, that's the way we're really trying to change the economy and address, and you're going to hear barriers to economic growth throughout all of the presentation, but to address those most important challenges in Wyoming that might be holding a community or the state back from growing their economy. And so that's one of the key components that we'll talk through today. Next, we'll jump into some learnings that we've learned about Wyoming's economy. What we've learned so far is Wyoming's economy is actually in decline. And we've learned that there's no silver bullets, that it's not a simple challenge. The challenge is very complex, and we'll need different types of tools to solve complex problems. And what else we've learned is that we know a couple ways to address those complex problems, one of which is the way we can look at a problem and then iterate and adapt as we learn more about that problem. What we're still learning is economic decline is caused by many different things, some of which are lagging knowledge sector, the jobs, housing, youth out-migration, and these are what we're referring to as barriers to economic growth. The foundational systems we have today in place actually don't make these challenges that we have better, they make them worse. And the systems that we have designed perfectly give us the outputs that they're designed for. And so what we're actually looking forward to learning next, and one of the things as it relates to BRC rules, is testing ideas, running experiments, and using these new tools, new ones that we discover along the way, as well as ones that we're building now, to help reverse economic decline. And that's where we think these rules fit in. And so to tie it all together, I'll real quickly touch on our vision at the Business Council. The vision is to create a diverse, broad, and lasting growth so that Wyoming can prosper no matter the economic climate or the status of individual sectors. And in order for us to accomplish this vision, we have to be bold and we have to think big. So with that, I'll hand it over to Noelle to start looking at the BRC rules updates that we're proposing.
So yeah, now we will start going into what the actual revisions that we're looking to do. So everything that Bert went over kind of led us to this outcome that we needed to update the BRC rules, as they are one of the root causes of the symptoms and current problems with the program. We do believe that this is one of the biggest iterations of the rules that we've attempted to date. And because of that, there is one big difference to this process that you maybe have noticed if you've reviewed the draft rules. And that's that we're actually repealing the current rules and creating new rules. So when you look at the draft rules, it's going to look, all of the rules are going to be crossed out, and then there's another set that everything is underlined. And so that's the fully repealing and creating new rules moving forward. Part of that process includes a program name change. So what we are proposing is keeping the BRC acronym, but changing it to Building Resilient Communities. This will take the emphasis away from businesses and place it back on the communities, because that's really the purpose of this program, is to help communities build that resilience and to work towards those barriers to growth. When we approach this rule revision process, we utilize a problem deconstruction approach. And here's kind of an overview of what that work looked like. So kind of our big problem that you see over here on the right side is that BRC decisions have not always been in alignment with the strategic direction of the Business Council. And so we then looked at symptoms of why that may be the case. And so we came up with 10 kind of bigger causes to that root problem. Each of these had many other components to it. So a lot of these had secondary and tertiary issues that we captured and that we discussed during it. And so then what we did as a team is we looked at all of the problems, looked at some of the root problems, and then looked at some ideas of how we could work towards solving those problems. As Bert said, it's a learning approach, and it's almost a scientific approach where we have a theory, we have a hypothesis, and now we're putting into place to determine if it will work or not.
So one of the things we looked at was systems are perfectly designed to deliver the results we get. And so we want to make sure with these new rules that we're aligning the rules with our desired outcomes to build the right system. So some of the impactful changes that we're proposing for rules are a focus around barriers to economic growth. So making sure that each community and the state as a whole understands and can work towards addressing those barriers to economic growth. You'll see this in the public notice. You'll see this in the application. You'll see this in the evaluation phase of how we present applications to our board and to SLIB. You'll see this in the reporting that comes post-project. So barriers to economic growth becomes a very big piece of building resilient communities as we see the rules going forward. When we look at the types of BRC projects, if you remember, previously there were 5 types of projects. We had business committed, we had business ready, we had community enhancements or community projects, we had managed data center cost reductions, and we had planning. And planning had 2 subtypes of funding available for full economic development plans or feasibility studies. And really what we're moving towards is barriers to economic growth. So if you want to do a plan, it will need to identify and build reasoning around the barriers to economic growth for the community. Projects will be focused around barriers to economic growth, and those could happen either with a business, and that could be a data center, so managed data center cost reduction, or similar to a business committed as we know them today, or it could be without a business and focused more on infrastructure. The other impactful change is match. And statutorily for planning, match is set at 25%. Match used to be a little bit more complicated, but what we are proposing is to simplify match to 25% across the board for all applications. Important to note, match can come from many different sources. Match can come from federal grants, match can come from other state grants, match could come from a business if you have a business committed project. Match can also come from a loan through BRC. We've clarified that only half of a BRC loan can count towards an applicant's match. And most importantly, I think with match, we see these as co-investments. So we're not asking for communities to just shell out money. we're asking to do projects where we're investing alongside a community, and we're both investing in this project with the anticipation of getting returns, right? So we're hoping with these investments that communities actually get more money out the other end when these projects are complete, and that we're not spending money, that these are truly investments. So Noelle, you want to jump into the next changes that we're proposing?
Definitely. Thanks, Bert. In addition to those, we also wanted to make sure that the expected return is based on actual investment into the project. So some of the larger BRC rules updates that go with that include revenue recapture, loans. Sorry, I went backwards. Never mind. Nope, we're good. Let revenue recapture, loans, and maximum award. So with revenue recapture, currently our rules state that communities can utilize up to 50% of their local revenue recapture for operational expenses. We're keeping the 50%, but we're adding to that revision that those local operational expenses shall be used primarily for personnel. We feel that this will help communities move forward with their economic development plans or projects, and that it'll really help communities kind of grow within themselves. We also added that at least 25% of the local recapture shall be used for the next revenue generating project. One other item that we have added to revenue recapture is that revenue generated by the applicant must be recaptured at a rate commensurate with the initial project investment. If you've been kind of following along with the Business Council in the last couple of years, these are things that we're already doing in our recommendations. And so now we're just putting it into rule. So we've been doing this anyway. Now it'll just be actually in rule. With loans, we're stating that loans will be drawn at 80% before grants are drawn. This kind of goes back to what Bert was talking about with match, since a loan, 50% of it is the local's match. This ensures that the local and the business council are contributing equally at the beginning of the project, and then the grants can go in after 80% of the loans have been drawn. We've also added that an otherwise eligible applicant that is delinquent on loans or revenue recapture payments will be deemed ineligible until those debts are made current. And we've added that a loan cannot be, or that we, the Business Council, cannot be second or subordinate on a loan. With the maximum award, we're stating, or we're proposing that the maximum for a project to solve a barrier to growth, since that's kind of the direction that we're going, is the current balance of the BRC account at the time of application. The only ones that don't fall under this are the managed data cost center reduction that stays at the $2.25 million. And then any planning grant will stay at $100,000. That one is set statutorily, so that's not something that we can change. The reason that we're doing this is we really do want to see big projects that really address those barriers to growth and can really move the needle for Wyoming. And so we hope that this change will encourage communities to really dig into what their barriers to growth are and what projects can really help solve those challenges.
Thanks, Noelle. And I think sometimes the impact or the signals that we're sending are in some of the more subtle details. And so when we think about some of the more subtle changes that we're proposing, one of the things we're looking to help build is capacity. I know Noelle mentioned in the large proposed changes that primarily some of that expense should be used for personnel, and that's because what we're identifying as one of the challenges is we need to have more capacity, more resources at a local level to do some of these bigger projects as we've increased that maximum. Another way we're looking at capacity, though, is applicants for their presentations will present their projects to both the Business Council Board and the SLIB Board. Partly because as we're looking to get a higher investment, co-investment with match, the capacity to present these projects to other funding sources will be important for the applicant, whether it's other state sources or potentially federal sources. So making sure that those presentations are polished and ready for many different people to look at to try and get the most funding possible for these larger projects that we're hoping to get. Then as we think about presentations, Noel and myself and the BRC staff will continue to do the analysis and the recommendations for projects. In fact, we will increase our diligence and our analysis on each project. We've got a new couple team members that are helping us dig deeper into those barriers to growth as we do the analysis on our side. The next sort of smaller change, but I think is impactful, is planning grants. What we're proposing is a block grant process where we can have a block of funding and do planning grant awards at the time that an applicant or a community finds them really strong with their momentum and in alignment with what they've already been doing, potentially after they just got finished with the assessment to action program or something like that. And then we can do planning grants more on a rolling basis than what we're currently doing, which is once a year. Another one of those more subtle changes is reporting. And so I mentioned it at the beginning, but we'll have the addition of identifying and reporting back on the barriers to economic growth for the applicant. But we're also going to change the duration of reporting. So if there is active loan or active revenue recapture, the duration of the reporting will go until one or both of those, depending on the situation, are complete. So annual reporting could go for much longer. If you have a 20-year loan, that could go for 20 years. This helps provide us the visibility into the projects and the reporting and the barriers to help understand if we're truly making a difference in the communities and in the state. Anything to add there, Noel?
Nope, I think you got through that just fine. I think the last couple of things here is just the timeline. So I'm sure a lot of you know the rules process can take quite a while. So I wanted to give an overview of what the timeline is. So at the Business Council board meeting in May, our board approved draft rules. And so then we went through the process of getting the governor's approval to proceed, which we have. So this is kind of where we are today. The comments are open, so you are able to submit public comments now, but that closes on July 27th. So if you do want to submit public comment, make sure you get that done before July 27th. After that, we will make any revisions necessary based on the public comment that we receive. And then we will ask our board to adopt the final rules at the September board meeting coming up in a few months. Once that once that occurs, we upload the rules and wait for the governor's signature. He has up to 75 days to do that. So more than likely, these rules won't go into effect until December, January timeframe. So potentially for the projects that would have the February 1st application deadline, that would be the first application deadline, more than likely, that would be under the new rules.
All right. Well, we talked about it early as we were talking about the learnings, but when we're looking at a complex problem, it does require multiple perspectives. And we appreciate everybody joining today for this webinar. And we want, right now there's 73 participants. We want all 73 people to provide public comment, whether it's good, whether you think we've messed up the rules completely, whatever that looks like. We do want as much public comment in this process so that we can solve a complex problem and get it right. So with that, we can open it up for questions. We have the link down there to provide public comment. It is a Google form. It's the way we're collecting comment. And that QR code should take you to the same place. And like I said, we want as much public comment as possible. I think having the applicants provide feedback on these proposed rules is very important to what we want to do to really try and solve this problem.
Hey, Bert, while we wait for more questions to come in, I will maybe kick the first one over to you, and a question slash maybe a little bit of a further explanation. Can you expand a little bit more on the statement that was at the beginning of the presentation that Wyoming is in a decline? Um, and maybe just talk a little bit of, how we don't necessarily always see that at the community and county level, but kind of that bigger picture that we're working towards.
You bet. That's a great question. Thanks, Heather. So when and I think the resource is actually on our website. So if you were to go look up the growth perspective, as we started looking at how to solve the complex problem of Wyoming's economy, there is a graph in there that shows Wyoming's economy in comparison to sort of our neighboring states and similar states. And what you'll see is Wyoming's economy spikes and it's keeping trend. But for probably the last 10, 15 years, Wyoming's economy is actually in decline, where the rest of our peer states are continuing to grow. So that's where that statement comes from. And you can go find that graph in the growth perspective. And it's just showing that really we have had some good economy in the past, but right now for the last, I think it's 10, 15 years, we've been in decline and not growing like our peer states have been growing.
All right, thanks, Bert. All right, so we'll just go through a couple of the questions here. I'm just going to take them in order for now. So, either one of you, Bert or Noel, would you please address how urban renewal authorities are considered under the rules? And the question says, notably, the ability of an urban renewal authority to capture tax increment revenue to service debt.
Yeah, I can attempt to answer that one. A URA is not an eligible applicant under BRC, so they would have to work with like a county, a city, a joint powers board to do that. I don't believe we've ever done a project that had TIF as part of the match, so that would be something that we would have to work with the community and the URA on. I think that we could probably consider it as a match, but as I stated, I don't think we've ever done a project with them. So that would have to be something that we would kind of have to work together and figure out. Bert, any thoughts on that?
I think I think we've looked into it once, but I think one of the challenges we found was in order for a project to go under contract with BRC and for us to fund it, it has to be fully funded up front. So we have to sort of see the money. Um, I think the challenge we had was with the tax increment financing, that doesn't come until later. And from a rules slash statute perspective of making sure that it's fully funded, I think that became a challenge of, is it fully funded? I mean, it could be there, but I think that's where we had a challenge the last time it was brought up. Like, we haven't said no to it. It's still something we can look into, but I think that was the challenge that we had.
All right, thank you. Okay, there was a follow-up. Okay, so here's one that might be helpful for a few folks to hear from you both. Would the infrastructure still need to be owned by the government body for 5 years? I'm guessing we were talking about maybe buildings specifically, because if we're doing water or sewer, then usually those are always owned by the government.
So the short answer is yes. It still has to be a publicly owned infrastructure. We have to make sure that there is adequate consideration of the investment that the state puts in, and what the benefit on the back end is. So we have stated that because it has to be a publicly owned asset and we have to meet that adequate consideration, we usually state about 5 years. Now, if there is a project that the adequate consideration is able to be met prior to the 5 years, that's something that we could consider. But as of right now, we kind of say 5 years is usually when that adequate consideration is met, and then the asset can be sold to a private entity.
Yep.
Thanks, Noel. Okay, here's another one about infrastructure. So can you expand on why funds for infrastructure projects may not be used on expansion of existing infrastructure unless it was previously funded by a BRC program? And then they go on to ask or suggest that if the community's barrier to growth is an inability to expand their water system, but their water system has never been funded by BRC dollars in the past.
I'm not sure where you're reading that, but I don't believe that that is actually a consideration. If there is an expansion of like a water line, that is something that we can look at. It doesn't have to be previously funded by a BRC project.
My understanding as well, Noel, is that we have some flexibility in there, even in rules and in statute, as long as it's deemed necessary. I believe we have the ability to help with those projects. The only caveat I will add is we also want to make sure that the investments that we make with BRC are the ones that are going to make those big impacts. If it's truly a barrier to economic growth, then I think that's something that we want to consider. But I also know there's other funding sources for some of those water and sewer projects, and we want to make sure that those have been utilized or being used in conjunction with BRC when we're looking at those projects.
And Megan, if that didn't quite answer your question, oh, okay, perfect. You were ahead of me. Okay, so it's section 6B in the rules is what she was looking at. Says grant loan funds for infrastructure projects may not be used for the rehabilitation or expansion of existing infrastructure unless existing infrastructure was previously funded under the BRC program in a prior phase of or phased project, or the council determines the rehabilitation or expansion is necessary to meet the purpose of the program. So, okay, so I think you guys addressed that then.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe that that language is actually statutorily, and then that's why we put it into rule. But we do have the ability as council and council staff, like what Bert said, if we deem that it's something that is necessary or can overcome that barrier to growth type of thing, then it is something that we can consider.
Okay, thank you. I think this question gets to the change where we said the limit can be whatever is in the fund. Are there guidelines or budget limits for any project related activities? For example, public involvement as part of a planning grant. So I was wrong, but so specific budget items, do we have any limits on those, or how are those addressed?
So we have some limitations on like ineligible versus eligible project costs. So like an easy example is equipment is not something that we can pay for under the BRC. With planning things, it's a little bit more flexible and broad, but there are some limitations. So it kind of depends what type of project you're doing, and how it's structured. But yes, there are a few limitations, but they're very few. It is a very flexible program. And so that would be one of those that it's almost project by project a little bit, but a lot of it comes in versus eligible versus ineligible costs, basically.
This is a question that has been asked a couple of times in a different way, but just a question regarding, would the new rules impact current projects that revenue recapture is being collected on? And then also, will the reporting timeframe be implemented on existing projects?
I'll take the second part of that question for reporting. So reporting on existing projects, because they're under the old rules and already under contract, will likely only be changed if there's an amendment to that agreement. We are considering what that will look like, but there could be amendments necessary, and then if there's an amendment necessary, we will likely add the caveat on reporting and to continue those on until revenue recapture and/or loan payments are complete. The first part of, oh, sorry, you just dismissed that question.
Sorry.
What was the first question, Heather?
I didn't know you were looking at those. Would the new rules impact current projects that revenue recapture is being collected on?
Only with an amendment, I think is the answer, and only for reporting. Nothing else would be impacted.
This is a similar question to one we had earlier, but more specific to a housing project. Do you anticipate that housing authority, joint powers boards, and land trusts would be eligible for housing projects?
So a joint powers board can be an applicant. A housing authority or a land trust is not an eligible applicant, but they could work with like a joint powers board or a city or a county to submit an application. And then with housing, that's where we're going to be really looking deep at your local regional barrier to growth. So if you want to do a housing project, something that we're going to need and that you'll have to provide is why housing is a barrier to growth in your community. What is the data that shows that? How is this project that you're bringing forth going to fix that problem? And so that's where we will really dig deep into the barriers to growth to determine if housing is your barrier to growth, if there are other barriers to growth that maybe need to be addressed first before housing can be addressed. And so that would be my suggestion to anybody who's listening and everything is really start thinking about what your barriers to growth are and then develop the project from there.
I'll add to that just a little bit, but I think the other important thing with housing is that statutorily BRC can only fund publicly owned infrastructure. So with a housing project, sometimes there can be some limitations to what we can help with, right? So water, sewer, roads, definitely publicly owned infrastructure. But when we get into the actual housing units, if they're not publicly owned, that's where we can get into a little bit of a challenge for BRC dollars helping to fund those.
And I will just add, we'd love to start seeing some so we could kind of look at them. We don't have anything, we haven't had anything on paper yet that we can look close enough at to kind of figure out what the best steps might be. So check in with your regional director if you've got one brewing. Okay, I'm gonna take the last question first, and then we'll a good discussion, I think, for kind of the end of our time together. But if you have any more questions, please drop them in the Q&A. So can a BRC be used to update an existing building to Industry 4.0 in the future? Would the land, building, and equipment all need to be owned by the city, county, EDO, etc. for 5 years?
So yes, other than the equipment, the land, the building would have to be owned by the public entity, whichever public entity that is, but not the equipment. The equipment can still be owned by the private entity. And then it would be for that 5 years, and then it could be sold back to a private entity at that point.
Okay. Would it make sense then if a community uses a planning grant to develop or update their master plan to include an entire section analyzing and addressing their specific barriers to growth?
Yes, I do believe it would.
I think that's a great thing. And again, on those planning grants, you know, as you're thinking about a planning grant and you're thinking about your scope of work on those, business council team members are happy to kind of take a look at what you're looking at and help make sure that what you're asking for when you're looking for a consultant is matching kind of the things that we're talking about too, so that you get a product that's actually really useful for you in moving forward with whatever your next projects might be.
I'll add, Heather, on that too. If you watched the last business council board meeting and we considered and the board recommended all three planning grants, you'll note that on the bottom of all three recommendations, our recommendation was to identify barriers to growth in all of those plans, knowing what we were proposing for rules coming up.
And this last question from Mike is, I think, a good one to kind of just round us out with. So we've discussed here the need to build local capacity and that some revenue can be used for staff. However, there is a need to train local representatives and build local knowledge base to take on complicated redevelopment projects. Are you anticipating hosting any community trainings as part of this broader effort?
Nice question, Mike, and way to end us on one that's a real good discussion, Heather. I mean, I'll share a little inside baseball, but there is a group of people at the business council really looking hard at how do we help provide more education opportunities? How do we help provide more coaching? How do we raise our level of service to match the bar that we're raising for applications and for match? And so there's a lot of us that are working towards different facets of that, right? Whether it's, can we help provide certain analysis as we're going through the projects of what barriers to growth are? Can we help provide a look at a community's barriers to growth from our analyst side? Is there other education opportunities that we're potentially missing because we're not taking a lead on something? So a lot that we're looking at, nothing today to share, but we're doing a lot of work in there. Noelle, Heather?
Yeah, I would just kind of echo what Bert was saying. As part of our discussions with this rule revision process, we acknowledge and understand that we're asking a lot from communities and from applicants with this rule revision. And we want to balance that with our technical assistance and our support of you. You know, we talked about being able to identify what a revenue generating project is with your local revenue recapture dollars. That's something that we can help and we want to help with. And so I don't want you all to feel like you're kind of on an island out there by yourselves. You're not. We're with you. We're here. We want to help and we want to get this right.
Yep, yep, I echo what they both said. I think that again, if you are in a place where you're not sure what to do next, reach out to whomever your regional director, or whomever you feel most comfortable with at the business council. We have a few programs now that can kind of help with some of that too. There's a lot of other things going on at the state, so we're happy to help connect resources or just have conversations about what it is that you need in your community for those projects to get off the ground, to be successful, or if you don't even know where to start. So always feel free to reach out to us, and and we'll help navigate you through it. All right, so I don't see any more questions popping up. Just a reminder, on the screen there is the QR code and the link for the public comment. That will be open until the end-ish of July 27th, it looks like. So we have some time, but if you have those comments burning, get them out there now. It's not a one and done thing. So if you have one now and then you go back through and you look through everything and you have more, please feel free to take advantage of that time frame and get those comments in there. We want to hear them all. That helps us learn how we best serve the communities with this program. This webinar was recorded. We are going to post it on our website, and we will share it with some of our other partners so that they can get it out to members. If you are here and you know someone who wasn't, please send them our way to take a look at that webinar, and then they can also go in and make public comment. The public comment box will be open. So without any other questions popping up, I think we can give you back a few minutes unless anyone has any closing thoughts.
No, Heather, I just want to reiterate your point on public comment. It's not one and done. If you want to say, give us a public comment on something that you like in the rules and then do a different one on something that you think we need to change, feel free. You can provide more than one public comment. Like Heather said, as many as we can get from as many different voices will really help us to understand if we're making the right changes to rules.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a fantastic week and reach out to any of us here if you have questions. We are happy to help in any way we can.